So in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about how to shoot really good corporate videos. So these are 5 tips that are going to help you shoot better corporate videos. I'm giving out all my secrets on this one. So let's get started. So number 1 is framing or composition. So this is the first thing you do when you set up your camera. You check out the frame. Now when you're looking at framing and composition in a corporate film, especially during the interview, you might look for a clean background, or you might look for leading lines that lead into or away from your target. That's your talent who's going to talk, who you're going to interview. And then you also want to look for separation and to use natural lights. So you might find a lot of lights from the ceiling, so you could use those lights to create some separation and depth, and even a bokeh effect to separate your talent from the background. Now you don't want to do it with extreme depth of field. You still want to look cinematic and not too digital. Meanwhile, you also want that nice separation to make things interesting and showcase this beautiful environment of your corporate scene. Another part about framing is symmetry. So you don't want to use something very popular, very symmetrical, where you put your talent right in the center of the frame. Instead, you place your talent on the 1/3 line. So 1/3 is dedicated to your talent, and the other 2/3 can be white space. Now this white space can also be used in very interactive and interesting ways. You could use it for leading lines leading into or away from your talent. You could use this 2/3 space for a branding. You could use it as white space and add motion graphics and other keywords. You could use it for infographics. So this 1/3, 2/3 space can be used in an intelligent way to make things look more aesthetical instead of putting that talent right dead center. Also, these days we work on a wider frame. It's a 16:9 ratio. It's not the 4:3. So your frame is a lot wider, and putting your talent right in the center can be a little awkward unless you're doing that for dramatic effect and you're leaving a lot of white space all around the talent, and having quite a wide shot where the talent is quite small. That looks nice as well, and in a way breaks away from conventional symmetry. So when you consider lighting, the first thing we do is we look at what natural lights are available. Now by natural lights, I don't mean just sunlight. They might be artificial in a way, but what's the ambient light that's available at the setting? So we make best use of this ambient light and then use our lights to enhance the scene. So typically in a scene, we'd want to add a backlight. It's a harsh light. It's also called a rim light. So this rim light creates a separation between the talent and the background, and also gives a nice glow and highlight to create some definition. This light is usually harsh. It's a kind of direct light, and it's placed behind the subject at some kind of a height. And then we have a fill light and a key light. Now the key light is the main light that gets focus or makes your talent look bright, and usually we use one side as the key light, and then the other side is going to get really dark. So to fill that in, you use the fill light, right? So the fill light is usually toned down a little bit, creates a lot of texture, you see a lot of detail, and meanwhile the key light creates this whole glow. So you get to see features of the face on one side, and then you get to see a nice glowing smooth complexion on the other side. And this kind of dramatic lighting makes things interesting. It adds a whole 3-dimensional angle instead of everything looking flat. So that's how you create this whole ambience. And then this backlight creates a very nice separation and a glow along the outlines or the silhouette of your talent. So this is what we do with lighting to make things interesting. Now one thing you need to know about the key light is it's usually a large diffuse light. So we use soft boxes. They're about 6 feet by 4 feet in dimension, and there is about 2 kilowatts of light coming through that. So for this kind of a light, you need to plug it into raw power. You don't want to plug these lights into the UPS because it might trip their computers and things at especially if it's an IT office. A lot of things could go wrong. Or sometimes in some cases we also get a generator and then bring in our own power so that you get uninterrupted power. So there have been some pretty interesting trends related to corporate videos, and I'm really glad some of them I missed. So there've been some ridiculous ones like lip syncing and music videos, which could go horribly wrong because corporate videos are mostly deal with in-house talents. You don't get actors and talents outside for most corporate videos. People from the organization act in these videos, so they're not professionals, and you don't want to push them to do things that they're not comfortable with doing because they're not used to performing in front of a camera, and you don't get a whole lot of time to train them and to teach them acting. So even picking up a couple of keys or typing, you might need to show them how to gracefully use their fingers and hands, and how to walk and things like that, what speed to walk, where to look, what do you do with your hands. So these are questions that puzzle most people when they're in front of the camera. Letting them be in their own environment and what they do in their daily lives, typical situations that they're familiar with, makes it a little easier for them to perform in front of the camera. I've found some really cool trends where you're talking about stories, about individuals, and then there have been some ridiculous ones like lip sync videos, flash dances, where you'd find a couple of people into it, couple of people in the frame totally disconnected. Then I've seen some over the top ridiculous corporate videos, where people come down helicopters and the whole thing is crazy, out of control. There's Mission Impossible happening, and then the ones I like are the short story ones, where they tell true stories, and it's really fun to watch. To watch your colleagues on this big day, to watch your colleagues act out and spoof a movie or do a funny dance. So there have been different trends, and some of them work really well depending on the audience, some not so much. The next tip is audio. You want to be very careful about audio so that you do your audio right. Good audio can really carry your video far. It makes your video look more professional. Just having good audio takes your video a notch up. What we typically do is have two kinds of mics. One is probably a boom mic, a Rode mic that captures sound only in a unidirectional way, and the other might be a lavalier mic like a Sennheiser mic. So the lavalier mic is plugged in really close to the talent, and you capture a lot of raw emotions, breathing. It also has a good bass to it, a good depth to it. So a mixture of these two sounds of a boom mic and a lavalier mic sound really good. Sometimes you could get away with just using either one. And typically what we do is have this input. So this input goes directly into the camera, so you don't have to worry about synchronizing sound by recording it separately and then synchronizing it to the reference sound from the camera. So the audio goes in directly through a mixer. Sometimes it goes directly into the camera, so that it saves you time and you can do your post-production faster, much faster, because sound synchronization is an extra step and it might repeat many times, because if you choose a different set of footage, something changes during the first cut, you need to pull in new footage, then you will have to look at syncing sound all over again. The other interesting thing is to add ambient sounds. So just the audio without ambient sounds makes the video a little flat or a little fake. So adding this ambient sounds adds an entire new dimension, a story. It adds life into your video. So that's very exciting to have all these follies, little kinds of bleeps, whooshes when your infographics come in. All this adds a whole new dimension into your corporate film. So now let's talk about camera settings. Now I know manual camera settings might seem a bit overwhelming, but end of the day there are only a few elements, and when it comes to video it makes your choice even easier. Now if you want a lot of depth of field, you might keep your aperture low, but I recommend having something that looks a little more cinematic. Okay, so you've got aperture, you've got shutter speed, you've got ISO, and then finally you've got white balance. So camera settings is all about setting these. Now what aperture does is it's about closing that iris, closing that lens, and as you close the lens, you close the aperture, you get less light into it. And meanwhile, it's just like squinting your eye, right? When you want to focus on something and you squint your eye, obviously there's going to be less light coming into your eye and your sensors. Meanwhile, you're able to focus at something a lot sharper. So that's how aperture works too. Shutter speed is basically the concept of how fast a shutter closes. However, with video, shutter speed isn't really having the shutters open throughout recording your video, but the shutter speed kind of looks at the exposure. So it's related to these frames per second. What does this translate to visually? So if you were capturing some like a splash of water, then you'd want to capture it at a higher shutter speed. And if you were looking at having a ghost kind of image or a time-lapse kind of image, you would look at having a lower shutter speed. ISO, you want to keep ISO as minimum as possible, or keep ISO set to a native resolution of the camera. So some cameras work well at 320 ISO, some at 800 ISOs. The last thing is white balance. So white balance needs to be maintained. You can automatically adjust it. You can adjust the temperature, and you want to try and make it look as real as what you see in your naked eye. So you keep adjusting the white balance a little bit according to your lights. So now let's look at camera settings. Now when you understand what kind of format you're shooting for, camera settings are pretty standard. It's easy to follow. They're not overwhelming. So let's get started on the camera settings. So typically you shoot at 24 or 25 frames per second. Now that determines your shutter speed. As a rule, you can keep your shutter speed at twice your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 or 25, you can keep your shutter speed at f1 by 50th of a second. You want to keep your aperture between 3 to 4, not too low. You don't really open that aperture up because you'll get extreme shallow depth of field. Now, although shallow depth of field looks very interesting, it makes it difficult if your subject moves a little back or front. Then their eyes and features might start getting out of focus, coming in and out of focus. Now typically when we shoot video, we look at a peaking, so we get a little red peaking to see what areas in focus, and then we lock the focus down. We don't let the camera autofocus. If you keep your aperture a little higher, you'll have your talent in focus, which is really important because you don't want footage with your talent going in and out of focus. What's left is the ISO. So you set your ISO to your native ISO or as low as possible, and if you start seeing noise, then you need to pump up your lights or add more lights. Now sometimes the background might have a little bit of noise, so we add some lights to light up the background, some mild lights, so that the background doesn't show noise. So you're done with your camera settings, you've done with your lights, your audio, so all that comes together and you can get your interviews done. Now once your interview is done, the final thing is B-roll or supporting shots, cutaways. So and for these kind of shots, we do a similar kind of lighting. Even if you're looking at a computer, a small product, a person walking, interacting, we use the same kind of 3-point lighting where you have a separation from the background. You've got a key light, you've got a fill light. So depending on the scene from point A to point B, or where this talent is interacting or what this talent is interacting with, we add these lights. Now a lot of time goes into eliminating shadows and reflections because they're really not suitable. So typically we move the lights around or face the lights from a top angle so that they create minimum reflections on the camera. Now to make things interesting, we might add a slider shot or a crane shot or even a little pan or tilt movement with a tripod to give you some nice organic looking movements. When you plan these movements, you want to understand what different angles mean and what different movements mean. So typically in a nutshell, when you do a low angle, when you do an angle from a low angle to when your subject is a little higher, it gives that sense of respect or looking up to the subject. So when you have a person in a leadership role or a person that you would like your audience to look up to, you might do these low angle shots. When you want to show how huge a campus is or how huge the facility is, you might do top angle shots or drone shots, where people look like little insects and they look very small compared to the whole location or the campus. So that exaggerates the campus and the location and the facilities to give more focus to the kind of area and dimensions in the set. So as you slide in or as you zoom in or as you go for closer shots, so you're looking at a more personal relationship as someone comes in, and as they go back they start to get more distant or more distinguished and separated from the audience. So when there's a time where you want to connect more, where you're talking about something that connects with your audience, you might go for a closer shot. So here's another bonus tip or an extra tip is aesthetics. So you want everything to look its best. So don't be afraid to move things away, to add some things into your frame. You might want to move an attractive plant, standee, a poster, work along with the branding. And then for your talents themselves, you might want to look at adding a little makeup, adding a little powder so that it'll take off shines from the reflection of the lights if they're sweating a little bit, or if they have a receding hairline. You want to straighten hair for some of the ladies so that they look their best, their hair falls smoothly. You don't have rough edges with hair going out of control, especially if you're doing a chroma shoot, you're using a green screen, then it's good to have their hair neatly combed and gelled. And let's look at styling also. That's another important thing. When you're looking at corporate videos, you're looking at tones of grays, blues, corporate colors, blacks. So something out of the ordinary, a red or purple suit, brown shoes, these things don't go really well with the rest of the theme. So you want to try also to avoid stripes, spots, small patterns, and look at some smart stylish corporate wear. Another thing is, if possible, it's good to avoid white shirts and white clothes because they bounce a lot of light and then they glow a little bit too much, and it draws too much attention to their clothes rather than the face. So it's better to use a slightly dull, subdued color. There's more attention that comes to their face while they're talking, so that you're not distracted, your audience is not distracted with other stuff going on or some patterns jiggling about because of camera distortions. That's it from me. So these are some of our secrets to making really good corporate videos. And if you've got any questions, leave them in a comment below or write to me.